Hi, I'm Bethany Reynolds and I'm a student at University Centre Peterborough. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Grace Moranfolu. I work for the Crown Prosecution Service and I'm an Inclusion and Community Engagement Manager, and I'm also the Chair of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association and Deputy Chair of the Civil Service Race Forum.
What sector is your company based in?
Well, the Crown Prosecution Service is a public sector organisation. That means we're part of the government's parastatal, and our sector is criminal justice.
Could you tell me what your company does?
Well, the Crown Prosecution Service prosecutes criminal cases that have been investigated by the police and other investigative organisations in England and Wales. The Crown Prosecution Service is independent, and we make our decisions independently of the police and government. It's our duty to ensure the right person is prosecuted for the right offence and to bring offenders to justice wherever possible.
Does it apply to a regional, national or global level?
Well, the Crown Prosecution Service only provides services to England and Wales. Scotland and Ireland have their own prosecuting authorities.
How many people work within your company?
The CPS has around 7,000 staff, so we're quite small when you compare us to some of the bigger departments like the Ministry of Justice, for example, which has around 70,000 staff.
What makes your company stand out?
I think what makes us stand out is a lot of people don't really understand what we do. Even though we're at the heart of the criminal justice system, people often get us mixed up with the court service and the police sometimes. But we work with our criminal justice partners to make sure that we protect the public and keep society safe. One of the things that makes us stand out also, I think, it's that the CPS prosecutes on behalf of society as a whole. We don't actually prosecute on behalf of the victim. And an example of that is we make a decision about whether to prosecute an offence, whether the victim of that offence wants us to prosecute that crime or not. Now, just give you an example. In the case of domestic abuse, sometimes an incident is reported to the police collect the evidence, and the victim will say, no, I don't want you to proceed with this. But the CPS, what we look at all the facts of the case, which is the evidence, and we also look at the public interest, and then we make a decision on that basis, whether it's in the public interest to prosecute this case. A lot of people don't really understand that responsibility that we have. We don't direct investigations, but we do work with the police at an early stage of complex cases to ensure that the right evidence is collected to build strong cases. And it's our duty to ensure that whatever we do, we're being fair. Because remember, I said we prosecute on behalf of society as a whole. So we have to be fair, not just to the victim, but also to the defendant. So if we, during the prosecution of a case, if we find any information that actually supports the defendant or points towards not his innocence, but actually supports the defense case, we are under an obligation and a duty to provide that information to the defense, so the prosecution process is fair. We also, one of the things that makes us stand out is that our decisions are independent of political influence, and we work openly, and we can't be directed or by politicians or even the police and crime commissioner. We have to take our decisions independently. And I think, to be fair, to emphasize how important this is, internationally, we have a reputation of having an independent and fair judiciary. So when big multinational companies have a dispute, they tend to want to have that case heard in the UK, because not the prosecution service, but the criminal justice processes in the UK are known to be independent and fair.
Does your business have multiple office locations?
Yes, the CPS is actually headed by Max Hill. He's the Director of Public Prosecutions. And although we operate across England and Wales, we're a corporate company, so we're a corporate organisation. So we have 14 regional teams that work locally. I work, for example, in the East Midlands, which is a team of the CPS. Each of these teams are headed by a Chief Crown Prosecutor who works closely with the local police forces and other criminal justice partners within that locality. And the CPS also has a central casework division which handles serious organised crime, issues involved with terrorism or fraud or other kind of cases that require specialist experience. We have multiple offices and locations.
What recent environmental changes has your company made or plan to make?
I think the CPS has done a lot over the years in relation to recycling. When we were based in the office, we used to use recycled paper. We have special time settings on our electricity in the office, so lights aren't left on for no reason. You know, the kind of lights that only come on when you're actually in the room. They've done a lot of saving devices to try and save the environment. Like I said, you know, we've got recycled paper. We have recycling in the offices, and the CPS has a general ethos in relation to making sure that we do as much as we can to reduce our impact on the environment. So, you know, staff are well aware of the initiatives that we all take part in.
What do you do?
What I do? Well, I work in the East Midlands as an inclusion and community engagement manager, and part of my role is to raise awareness and understanding of the Crown Prosecution Service in the community. And like I said previously, people get confused about what the CPS does. And the reason we try and ensure we engage with the community is for people to understand our role, understand the need for fairness in criminal justice, so people are reassured whether you're a defendant or a victim. And also for people to understand how long it takes for a case to go through the criminal justice process. It can take a very long time. And when we engage with the community, we hope and expect that the community representatives we meet will pass on the information to victims and witnesses and give them some reassurance that the length of a trial or the length it takes for a case to get through the criminal justice system doesn't mean that justice is not being served. It's just for them to understand that the prosecution process is taking place and it does take time for it to happen. We also try to make sure, as part of our community engagement role, that we find out what the community want. One of the key aspects of the Crown Prosecution Service is our public interest activity. We prosecute on behalf of the community, and we need to know what the community thinks about particular things. Now, I'll just give you a little example. When somebody has their car keyed, you know, someone just walks by and uses something and scratches a car's paintwork. On the surface, people might think, oh, well, it's just a trivial offence. It's not, you know, we've not killed anybody. It's something to do with aesthetics. It's not that important. However, if the community says that these types of offences are very important to us, then we have much more of a mandate to prosecute those types of offences. And sometimes, for example, the police, I know that's an offence. People commit offences every day, but in reality, the criminal justice system cannot prosecute every single offence that happens. So, you know, the CPS has to make a decision. is this case in the public interest? Is it worth prosecuting? Is it fair to prosecute? And sometimes when we ask people, ask the community what their views are on things, we get some very clear messages. For example, there was a street once where everybody's car in the whole street had been keyed. Someone had taken a script, every single car, there was like 50 cars that had been damaged. And in that respect, the CPS decided that they were going to prosecute that particular case because it was really serious about the damage that had been caused. And we have to balance that decision as well. So I hope that kind of gives you an understanding of the kind of things I do.
How long have you been doing it?
Well, I've worked in the CPS for a very long time. I've been doing the current job I've been doing for 10 years, but I've actually been working in the CPS for around 30 years. I've done a wide variety of roles from when I joined. I really love working for the CPS because the job is so varied. I remember I joined in the late 1980s, and I remember being overwhelmed with the fact that we dealt with everything in those days, from parking tickets all the way through to murders, and you were very involved in all the cases. It was really exciting, interesting. No one day was the same. So yeah, I've been doing it for a long time, and I love the job, to be honest. I love what we do.
How did you get involved in it?
Well, to be honest, I didn't. I actually studied fine arts and sculpture. That's what I actually studied at university. But I fell into the Crown Prosecution Service by accident. You know, in those days they had I can't remember what they used to call them, but if you were looking for a job, you go to a particular place and they find your job. And it was just, I'd applied for lots of different jobs, and this one came up with the CPS. And in those days, the CPS was quite new, so there wasn't really much information about what it was about. But I, passed the interview and attended, and I've never looked back. I've found it fascinating.
What kind of projects are you working on right now?
Right now, one of our key priorities is social mobility. So right now I'm working on a digital work experience program. Around 4 or 5 years ago, I created for my region a work experience program. We got young people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds to spend a week in the CPS. And it wasn't the kind of program where you would just be sitting with a lawyer and watching what they were doing. I designed the program so students were given the opportunity to feel what it was like to be a lawyer. So we kind of gave them a mini induction as if they were lawyers, even though they were around 15 to 18 years old. So they did a bit of legal practice. They went to court, did court observation. They interviewed our staff. And the whole point of the program was for those young people to see that actually being a lawyer is quite easy, but passing your O-levels, A-levels, and your law degree, that's the hard bit. But once you pass those stages, actually anybody can do it. So we usually have a face-to-face 1-week program, but since the lockdown, we had to cancel our program in summer 2020. It was devastating because we'd done all the work that had to go into it. So this year, I'm trying to put together a digital program which still has the same kind of impact and interactivity and activities, even though it's going to be online, which is very difficult to try and get it right. But that's what I'm working on at the moment. And also, like I said, I'm the chair of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association, which is a staff network for Black and ethnic minority staff in the CPS. And I'm sure you will all be aware that despite everybody's best efforts, life is never fair and just and balanced. And even in the CPS, there is need for the opportunity for staff who feel that they have not been given a fair opportunity to, to speak to power and give their views and opinions, and also identify innovations that can help redress the imbalance. So that's the kind of thing I do with the network. And we're not the only network. They've got the CPS, they've got some well-established network. We've got an LGBT network, a carers network. There's so many issues in life, in the way we interact with each other, that create unfairness and imbalance. And I'm really proud to say that the CPS is an organization that recognizes this and tries to redress the balance. So for me as well, in the Crown Prosecution, when the MBCP at the moment, our priorities are about reflecting on the end of year, where I'm busy trying to reflect on what we've done this year. We're doing an end of year report. We're having an annual general meeting with all the members to discuss what we're going to be doing to take activity forward into the new financial year. So I'm really busy with that as well. And there's so many things going on in the CPS in relation to our roles. There's so much going on in the community, particularly after Black Lives Matter and after the impact of COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the community and on the ability for people to access justice. I mean, on the news recently today, we were hearing that people who had crimes committed against them in 2018 are now being told those cases might not even get to trial till 2022. So the impact on the CPS's ability to deliver justice is huge. And part of what I have to do is help do a lot of community engagement to reassure victims and witnesses that this doesn't mean that the crimes committed against them are not being taken seriously. It's just the reality that we haven't got enough spaces in the courts, we haven't got enough courtrooms to get through all the cases in court. So it kind of gives you an overview of some of the stuff I'm involved in.
What are your favourite parts of the job?
I guess I think it's the variety of the work we do. And also I have a personal passion for fairness and justice, which I think is kind of linked in to what the CPS's ethoses and values are. So I love the complexity of trying to redress the balance and achieving that. And then you go on to the next problem and issue, you look at the complexity of it, whether it's a case, whether it's a situation in the community, and then you think about how are we going to do this, and then you implement it, then you redress the balance. I just think that's really fascinating. It's what's kept me in the service for such a long time as well.
What do you think are the skills needed for your job?
For my particular job, you have to be curious, you have to be determined, you have to be a person who doesn't get discouraged easily. Any kind of role which is about trying to redress unfairness is a very lonely role sometimes. Most people like to go with the generality. When you're trying to address imbalances, you're kind of going against the flow of how things are. And it makes a role like mine, particularly with community engagement, it's not a role for people who get discouraged easily. So you've got to be, look on the bright side, and like I said, be curious, be persistent. And in relation to other skills, like practical skills, I did a lot of, I've got a postgraduate diploma in training and development. So I love designing courses and delivering them. I've also got Prince 2 practitioner. I've had it twice. It expires, and you've got it. So I've had it. I've done it twice, but I've always used the principles all the time. Have kept me sane. The project management principles. I always put them into practice, which has helped. And also with this job, you've always got to read. If you work in criminal justice is about the legislation. You've always got to kind of keep on top of the legislation, have an understanding about what's going on in the wider criminal justice. to make sense of what you do, and then to be able to explain what you do in the wider context. I don't know whether that makes sense to you, but for example, people will say things like, victims in particular, they will follow the prosecution case through, they will go to court, they will get a conviction, the defendant will get convicted, then they'll be disappointed at the end that they weren't sent to prison and they only got a fine. And if you limit your knowledge base just on the CPS, you won't have an understanding of how the probation service works and what's the role of prisons. And you have to be able to explain to victims sometimes that prison is what society thinks is the punishment, but actually rehabilitation and getting people to change their behavior is actually the ultimate aim of the criminal justice system. People think, for example, that prison should be a punishment, but actually prison is the punishment, not what happens inside. The punishment is being kept away from your family and friends. That's the punishment, but people don't get that. They think it's in the prison, something even worse is going to happen to you, but it's not. So it's just about, to me, one of the skills is you've got to have you've got to have a better understanding of everything going around you in relation to criminal justice in order to be able to deliver this role properly. You've got to see all the interconnections. You've got to work with a lot of part of what I do is I work with criminal justice partners like the police, the court service, probation service, prisons as well, lots of charity organizations. You have to kind of have an understanding of what their issues are, and before you can support them and explain to them what the CPS does, you have to understand what they need and making that connection.
How do you network?
I think networking is crucial in any profession. I personally think that networking starts by you being a bit bold and brave and just reaching out to people and say things like, hello, my name is Grace. What do you do? That's just the beginning of networking. Some people think there's some magic process to it, but actually to me, it's making friends, making sure that people see that you're available, that you're open, that you're there to help. And I think that helps with the job I do. You have to be a very good networker to be an inclusion and community engagement manager. And I go to so many meetings. You go to a meeting which is, you've got maybe 30 people around the table. You don't know any of them. For me, to network, I have to make an impact immediately for them to know that I'm there on behalf of the CPS. And who are you? I network by making sure that everybody I meet understands who I am, the organization I work for, and the impact that organization can have on them, no matter how obscure. And I think it's really important, particularly for students. One of the first things you do when you start networking is, all your associations that you have in the university. Some people would think they're too busy studying to join an association. But actually, by joining it, that's the first step of networking. When you join, it's also the activity you do is part of networking. So to me, there's no point of joining the Literary and Debating Society if you're not going to debate and compete with everybody else. There's no point. The whole point of networking has to have a purpose. So yeah, networking is very important. You have to have a purpose when you do it. And you mustn't be shy. And people just feel exactly like you. In a room with 30 people you don't know, there's going to be other people that don't know you, don't know people either. And don't be put off, because sometimes you might say hello to somebody and they just ignore you. Doesn't matter. You don't know what's going on in their head, what kind of day they've had. You either move on to the next person or be persistent, So yeah, networking is very important.
What changes have you seen in your sector in the past 5 years?
I think some of the biggest changes is the use of technology. It's just been amazing, particularly during this lockdown year. Over the last 5 years, there's been legislation from around 5 years before that saying that the criminal justice system should introduce things like supporting victims to have video evidence, so you don't have to come into court. You can give evidence from a video, from another room, from a different part of the country even, or from another part of the world. It can be beamed into court. And there was so much reluctance, and I won't use the word excuses, but so many reasons why people in the criminal justice system thought it wouldn't work. And a lot of these technology suggestions actually were suggested to help people, to make it easier for people to give their evidence, to make it less stressful. But there were so many reasons why these things won't work, and so much reluctance. So if one court had the technology, another court was, oh, we can't put it in, our building is too old, we can't wreck it. There were all sorts of reasons. But because of the lockdown, it's really accelerated things a great deal. And I'll just give you a very simple example of it, the acceleration. Just before the lockdown, the CPS had agreed to roll out MS Teams, Microsoft Teams, across the service. And I think they had a delivery plan that was going to take a year for everybody to start using it, a year to show people how to use it. So as soon as the lockdown started, even though no one had been shown how to use it, and the plan was in place for it to take a year for everybody to use it, within a week, everybody struggled with the thing, and we all started using MS Teams, and it kind of shows the kind of changes that have happened. The fact people can see you can make things happen if you really want to. So yeah, technology has been one of the biggest things for me. The use of technology. There's also lots of legislation that's come in that have been quite innovative around domestic abuse and violence against women. The new domestic abuse legislation kind of links in with technology. Things like lots of legislation around sexual offences as well, where especially around rape, because a few weeks ago, if you've been raped by a colleague, if you'd dared send him a text message that seemed a little bit racy, the whole case would have collapsed just on that basis alone. Like, oh, how dare you send him a text? But now the legislation has changed, so people have a better understanding that you can send somebody a saucy text message without that meaning it gives that perpetrator the right to rape you. So I just think, apart from technology, also attitudes are changing quite quickly, and these have had an impact on our sector in the criminal justice.
And what are the developing opportunities for your sector?
I think it's still technology. Again, the technology is changing our sector a great deal still, and we're in that process. So I'm sure in a few years' time, the criminal justice system will be completely different than what it was. We might not even need courts anymore. Another 10 years, there might not be a need for a magistrate's court or a crown court. It might all be done virtually, for example. So yeah, great opportunities.
What are the developing pressures for your sector?
I think at the moment it's about the demand for services and the expense of delivering them. Everybody says they want justice, but actually when you're in court and you look around all the people who have to be paid to make that happen, it's a very expensive service to give society. So it's a continuous challenge about how we make the criminal justice system cost effective and value for money, which is part of one of the roles and responsibilities of the Crown Prosecution Service, to make sure that we're not prosecuting cases that are not value for money, or cases that actually address what our public want us to prosecute.
What organisations or professional bodies represent your sector?
I would say the organisations that represent some elements, because we might have to, I know the Bar Council, the Law Society, but I'm sure there are other organisations as well. But these are the bodies that represent our professional, the lawyers, the Bar Council, Law Society. However, the CPS is made up of more than lawyers. We've got other professions. We've got HR, finance specialists, IT specialists, health and safety, equality and diversity, communication specialists. All of those will have professional bodies that represent their particular specialisms as well.
What advice do you have for someone wanting to work in your sector?
The advice I would give anybody who wants a career in law is to make sure you get as much experience under your belt. And I'm not saying working for a lawyer, but anything that is relevant to show whoever a prospective employer that you're really serious and you're really keen, whether that is speaking, for example, if you can't get work experience in a law firm, just saying you spent a day with a lawyer and what you learned from that experience shows interest and willing. You know, sometimes people think if they can't get a work experience place with a law firm, then they can't be, you know, that's the end of their career. No, show other willing. Say, for example, like you went to the court to volunteer your services as a volunteer for the witness service or for the legal advice centre, or you just have to use your imagination to show that you find that particular profession something you want to do by any means necessary. I just think you have to be creative, and I think employers find creative innovation attractive. It makes them think that you would go above and beyond for them as well. So sometimes people who are lucky enough for their dad to put them in a law firm for a week might not have as much kudos as somebody who says, I couldn't get that, but I did something else. Do you see what I mean? So yeah, you have to get some kind of show your enthusiasm for the trade, for the craft.